Let's get talking about something called hinging and also grace notes and how they can help make your playing a little bit more funky. First, I want to mention we're ditching the piano. At this point, we're going to be working with some electric keys. So let's break these down individually, hinging and grace notes. So what exactly is hinging? Let's start off by taking a chord, something jazzy, like A minor 7. A minor 7 has the notes A, C, E, and G, and these four notes come from the A minor scale. In this case, we're using the natural minor scale, which is all white notes. Now we can take any of the four notes from our chord, A, C, E, or G, and instead of playing it right away, we're going to sidestep it to one of the notes from that scale. So for example, we could have the A down a step to G, and then resolving to the A, or up to B, and then resolving down to the A. We could do the same thing with the third of the chord, C. We could have it down on a B, hinging up to that C. Technically, I guess you would say it's hinging down to the B and then brought back to the C. And we could also have it hinging to the D and then back to C. This is also known for classical musicians as neighbor tones. It's the same sort of idea. So in a melody, you can have a melody note, you move to a neighbor tone, which is up a step or down a step, and then you return back to that melody note. We're just doing that internally within chords. So we're back to this C can move to B and back, or D and back. For those of you that are inclined with music theory, you would know this is A minor 7 sus 2, A minor 7, A minor 7 sus 4, A minor 7. That doesn't really matter right now. We're just going off the sound and what sounds good to us. You don't need to know all the theoretical terms at this point. We're just taking the four notes from the chord and sidestepping some of the notes up or down and returning them back. In some cases, we're starting on that neighboring note and then resolving it. So, for example, we could have A minor 7 hinging up and then back, or you could just have it hinged from the start and then moving into place. Next would be the E, the fifth of the chord. If we take that E, hinge it down to D and back, or hinge it up to F and back, the F doesn't sound as good. It sounds all right. The D sounds quite nice. That sounds quite nice. I take it back. The F sounds fine. Where it's going to sound weird is here. So we have now the seventh, G. If I hinge down to the F, it's going to sound quite bad because we have this E and F clashing as a semitone. But I could hinge it up to A, and then back to that G, and that sounds relatively fine. Nothing wrong with that. So maybe the only option here for minor seventh chords would be hinging from the flat 6 up to the flat 7, or F to G in this case, doesn't sound quite as good. Now maybe you like that sound. You could even have a little notebook where you take notes of which of these hinges you prefer the most, and that can ultimately lead to your stylistic sound. So let's take two of those versions of us hinging, and we're going to apply it within a chord progression. We're going to do an A minor 7 to a D minor 7. First, we're going to dance around the C, the third of this chord, and then we'll dance around F, the third of this next chord, D minor 7. For our first hinge, we're going to hinge down, and this is just randomized. You can come up with your own version of this, but here it is. So we have a B hinging to a C, and then on this next chord, we're going to have a G hinging to an F. Let's take that concept and apply it with pattern 1A that you would have learned from the previous course. Let's apply these patterns over a funky drum beat. Here we go. In 1, 2, 3, 4. Sounds all right. So what we have is this A minor 7 moving down to D minor 7 and A minor 7 moving up to D minor 7. You can choose to move to different octaves to help create some variety. Now ultimately I had to really restrain myself from making things a little bit more funky. At the end, I wanted to apply a different chord. I wanted to do some variations within this, so I'm going to show you what that would look like, but it can be as simple as starting with one of the funky patterns that you know and starting very bare bones with the concept in mind. Which note do I want to hinge on the first chord? Which note do I want to hinge on the second chord? And if you have a longer chord progression, for example 4 chords, you don't have to hinge everything. And also worth mentioning is that you can do this with inversions as well too. That way you're not moving around quite so much. So the A minor 7, that first hinge might look something like this, whereas the second one, if we were to take something like this, so I'm omitting the 5th, but we have D's in the left, D in the right, okay? We've taken these notes from D minor 7, we've gotten rid of the 5th. The 5th is just kind of filler, so there's no A, and then we brought the C down below. So now the C's down here. Now remember, we were hinging G to F, so it looks like this with that pattern. So we end up getting that's the same idea as to what I was just playing, but again, it's like one notch a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to put the drums back on and I'm going to show you how I would add a bit of variation to these patterns to spice it up even a little bit more. It's slightly discretionary, but everyone's going to have their own way of applying their own tactics, their own stylistic flair to these patterns. Let's jump in. Let's try it with some funky drums in 1, 2, 3, 4. It's variation 1. Let's make it spicy. And then coming back. So what I did was I had the basic pattern. At the end, I created some little variation, and I liked the sort of tempo or the rhythmic density of that variation, so I sort of just continued that throughout. Now, ultimately, that pattern in the end was quite a bit different than pattern 1A. But what you can see here is that you can start with a basic pattern, explore slightly outside of it, and it might take you to a whole new pattern altogether. 2 other things that I want to mention about hinging. The first is that you can keep your right hand the same while moving your left hand around, and you can get some great results from that. Let's check it out using A minor 7. So I'm on this A minor 7, let's move the left hand down to F, down to D, back to F. Without me talking. Pretty simple, my right hand's not moving very far. My left hand is outlining the harmony in terms of the basic foundation of each chord, and they're working copacetically with one another. Now it's also possible to hinge multiple notes at a time. Let's switch keys. So we're going to be in F minor for a second. For those of you that don't know the key, it's 4 flats, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, F. I digress. We have this F minor 7 chord, and we're going to hinge the 2 middle notes, A flat and C, down 1 note in the scale to G and B flat. So we get this sound leading up to our F minor 7. We're going to keep our left hand on F that whole time, so we get this sound. And then I'm going to do the same thing I just did where I move my left hand down to D flat in this case, and then down to B flat. And I'm going to move it back up to that F eventually. Let's put a spicy, fun, funky pattern with it, and here's how it sounds. Pretty simple in terms of the right hand. Just moving back and forth between those 2 patterns, and we can think of it as this complex harmonic idea, but really we're just hinging 2 of the middle notes of the chord to neighboring notes and then back, and playing around with the left hand to change the context of the harmony. Now we've talked quite a bit about hinging, but the last note I want to give you is to try to remember what scale you're in. So I'm not saying that every C minor chord needs to use a C minor scale, or that every F minor chord needs to use an F minor scale. But you need to keep in mind what your home bass key is. So if my chord progression uses 4 chords or even 8 chords, if I'm playing those chords from the key of C minor, then I'm going to stick with the notes from C minor. For now, if something sounds weird, experiment and see what sounds better, but for the most part, 90% of the time, the notes from your home key are going to give you the best results when you try out hinging. Next, let's talk about grace notes. We're going to talk about them in the exact same way that we talked about hinging, but we're going to speed up the process. So for our example, we're going to take A minor 7 again, and we're going to play D instead of E, the 4th instead of the 5th. And then we're going to move up to this E. With hinging, we would have had something like this, which sounds fine. But what we're going to do is play this shape and then this shape back to back like this. This is a grace note, a little tiny note that slides into another note. It has graced the second note with its presence. And in some styles of music, you'll hear this called a slip note, but for the most part, you will often hear grace note. So one of the easiest ways to apply this could be demonstrated on a C major chord. We know the scale C major, or hopefully we do, all white notes. So any hinging or any grace notes that we do are going to be from that scale. What we're going to do is play finger 2 on the D before sliding up into the E, or slipping up into the E. So we have this sound. We could try this on A minor. We could try this on F or on G. It's the same concept. Now if I'm in like E flat major, for example, and I want to try one of these, I would have to be cognizant of the fact that F would be sliding up into G. And on my A flat chord, B flat would be sliding up into C. Again, keep in mind what your home bass scale is and stick to those notes. So one thing I like to do is after I do a grace note, sometimes I'll come down a couple notes in the scale. So we have this sound, stepping back down to C, A minor. We've done this grace note from B to C, stepping down a couple notes, F major, stepping down a couple, and then G. So you get this. But we haven't really applied it to one of our patterns yet, so let's make sure that we explore that. If we were to go back to pattern 1A and try this on an A minor chord, not A minor 7, we'll come back to that, but A minor, we would get something like this. Now that last chord you could do an A minor or with this B as the variation, so C, C in the middle, B. It's a preference more than anything, but that's the idea. So we're doing a couple with the grace and then a little shot towards the end. You could do all grace. It just gets a bit redundant and it's not quite as funky in my opinion. So let's do a pattern where we do 2 A minors, 2 D minors in. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's the basic idea. What we can also do though is go back and apply this on minor 7th chords. And we're going to take this C major example that we talked about, and we're going to put our left hand down below on A's. So what we end up getting is the same feeling in the right hand, which is a beautiful sound. Now instead of the C major going from the 2 to the 3, if we're thinking C major scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the second note of the scale was going to the 3rd, or we could say the 2nd of the chord was moving to the 3rd of the chord. Now by putting A in our left hand, we have the 4th of the chord going to the 5th. This sounds very good on minor chords especially. So we have a beautiful little sound. Let's take a chord progression like A minor 7 to F major 7. So A, C, E, G to F, A, C, E, and we're going to apply a grace note, finger 2 to finger 3, the 4th to the 5th. Now on this F chord, here's a great example of needing to use the home key. In the scale of F major, B flat is actually the 4th note, and this chord is F major 7, so shouldn't I be using the F major scale? No. We're using F Lydian, and we don't have to go so far into as to why, but the basic reason is that we're trying to stay in our home key, and our home key, A minor, just natural minor, does not have a B flat. It has a regular B natural. So listen to this progression where when I go to the F major 7 chord, I'll use that B flat and you'll see it does not sound right. Pretty bad, right? So let's go back again. We're going to try it with the B. Instead of the B flat, we're staying true to the A minor scale in. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do a little variation. Let's take this concept of keeping the right hand part the same while we move our left hand to change the context of the harmony. We're going to apply it to pattern 1, but we're going to use one of the variations. We end up getting something that sounds like this. Now notice I was doing the grace note, but then also doing some hinging to the other side. So you can start to combine these two concepts in nearly an infinite amount of possibilities when you take all the patterns that I've taught you, all the patterns that you've created, and all the patterns that you have yet to explore. So it's a bit of a simple concept, but it's also very vast. I highly recommend play around with hinging, play around with grace notes. This can give you a much more professional sound when layered over top of the basic patterns that you already know. Be sure to try out these two concepts over top of the chords that you prefer, the chord progressions that you enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this class. I hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you in the next one.